Hello, everybody, and welcome to this very special episode of Songwriting Simplified with me, Jonny Lipsham, here at jonnylipshamstudios.co.uk, here in the southeast corner of Scotland, where it is scorchio at the moment. It is very, very hot. We're probably going to get some thunderstorms right now at midnight. It is currently 17 degrees Celsius outside, and in here right now, it is 34 degrees Celsius. So in here, it is extremely hot. Outside, it is abnormally mild for the time of year. So tonight's show, as you may have guessed from the title of the show, is in memory of Brian Wilson, the musical genius, songwriter, composer, arranger, producer, mix engineer, and all-round musical genius, creator of an entire popular music sound and style that had previously never existed. I am, of course, talking about Brian Wilson, who died today. Very sad news. The guy was legendary, and his control of the entire production process from start to finish at the time was pretty unique, and very rare. That an artist who is also not only the artist but the band leader and the songwriter and the arranger would be able to have complete creative control over all of his works from start to finish was incredibly unique. But he knew what the sound of each of his songs should be. He had it all settled in his mind. He knew, he could hear it in his head, how it should go, how it should sound, and oftentimes would have exactly the right person in mind who could help create that sound, and only they could contribute that particular sound. It wasn't just about hiring just a keyboard player. It had to be a specific keyboard player. It had to be a specific Hammond organ player, or it had to be a specific guitarist or a specific bass player, in order to be able to get the sound that he heard in his head. And he knew who he needed and who he wanted, and he always pretty much got exactly what he wanted. As is the case with many musical geniuses, they have personality flaws, and they have mental health flaws. I guess it's kind of par for the course when you are an incredibly intensively creative person. We see this replete throughout music history. People like Beethoven, Mozart, Handel, Tchaikovsky, Chopin, Debussy, Ravel, lots and lots of clear references to this kind of trait, this kind of personality issue in classical music, but you also get this in jazz music as well. The pioneers, the innovators of music, who are the creative geniuses, tend to have considerable flaws we tend to see those things in things like drug and alcohol habits, and maybe even sex addiction and other such habits. Charlie Parker is a very, very fine example of that, who burst on the scene in the early 1940s, playing with the McShane Big Band, and pioneered basically an entirely new way to play music. And sadly, his life did not last very long. He lived until only the age of 34 before he suffered a heart attack and died watching the Dorsey Brothers show. And when he was having his medical exam post-mortem done, the medical examiner thought he was 65. He was only 34. So music is replete with geniuses who, you know, they just have these kind of personality things that go on. And Brian Wilson sadly was one of those. He was an alcohol abuser. He was a drug abuser, and you know, he had lots of vices that, in the end, were probably his undoing. And it's actually amazing that he had the long life that he did have. So when you consider the facts of how he abused his body and how he abused his mind, he had an incredibly long life. It is kind of very, very sad that the last several years of his life have, you know, been a life basically lived in, you know, a mind slowly collapsing and falling apart. Um, uh, Obviously, I'm too young to remember some of his classic Beach Boy records, but I did see him play here in Scotland, in Edinburgh, probably about maybe 20 or so years ago, maybe 17 or 18 years ago. And let's just say uh, he performed extremely well, and the performance was magical. It was wonderful. It was a great evening. It was a fantastic show. He had some of the best musicians you can imagine working with him, and including the Royal National Orchestra of Scotland, who were working with him as well and performing with him on some of the songs. So it was his band plus an orchestra. Now, what I didn't realize was that the orchestral arrangements had actually been written by Brian himself. Um, you know, even with kind of his mind not working properly and needing considerable assistance with just basics of life, he was still, you know, reasonably well able to write a bunch of orchestral arrangements. So that to me was astonishing, but he had certainly lost the ability to interact with an audience. And sometimes he would get quite belligerent with the audience and would get quite upset if he wasn't getting the response he wanted from the audience. But he just wasn't really that able to communicate with the audience in such a way that the audience would know what he wanted from them. But we all enjoyed his music, and we enthused, we applauded, we cheered his music. But we just couldn't understand anything he was saying. And it was nothing to do with his American accent or anything like that. It was just simply the fact that he just couldn't communicate anymore. And unfortunately, that was probably his final performance in the UK. And so, pretty sad, really. But it's sad news to hear of his passing today. But I think also probably a relief as well, given his health in the last several years. So this episode of Songwriting Simplified is dedicated to the memory of Brian Wilson. May he rest now in peace and free from pain and free from anguish that he had suffered for certainly the last several years of his life. So there we go, folks. I wanted to start the show off with that because he had such a profound influence upon popular music. And Songwriting Simplified is a show all about popular music and writing popular song and writing songs that use song forms and structures from popular music from the 20s all the way, the 1920s all the way through to the 2020s. So, you know, we cover 100 years worth of popular music history here and popular musicology here on this show. So Brian Wilson definitely left a major mark and a major stamp on music, and how pop music could sound. I mean, he created a sound that nobody else had ever created before, with his understanding of harmony, vocal harmony. He was just doing things with harmony that nobody else in popular music were doing. Instrumentation. I mean, he would have all kinds of instruments on his records. He would have instruments that you didn't think would go with the kind of music that he would be associated with, but he did. He had like accordions, he had 12-string guitars, he had ukuleles, mandolins, but he had the cream of the West Coast session scene playing on his records. People like Carol Kay and Hal Blaine, which were probably the rhythm section of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, on the West Coast of the United States. And so he had all of those musicians at his disposal, and created some amazingly unique sounds and extended works. I mean, these weren't just 3 minutes and 30-second songs with a predictable verse, chorus, bridge, middle section kind of form that we are very, very used to in the modern songwriting era, from certainly the 1950s onwards. Well, he kind of changed things up and took inspiration from other song forms and from, operettas and things like that, and classical works inspired a lot of his sound, which is why his sound was such a unique thing. I mean, you could call it a fusion, but I think fusion has overtones of kind of Lee Ritenour and Dave Grusin and smooth jazz and that kind of thing. Certainly these days it has those kind of connotations, rather than kind of like the jazz fusion music of Return to Forever and Chick Corea and all of that. Brian Wilson's music was not really a fusion, but more like an alloy of several different sounds and several different styles that were kind of uniquely drawn together, including his really, really solid grasp of classical and neoclassical harmony, which pervades pretty much everything he wrote. He didn't just write backing vocal parts. He wrote counterpoints, multi-voice counterpoints. I mean, a fine example of this would be Good Vibration, where you have a melody, but you also have a 4-part counterpoint going on underneath it. What is counterpoint? Counterpoint is where you have multiple melodies being performed at the same time, and those multiple melodies will create harmonies by the way they interact with each other. And so this is what you get with a lot of Brian Wilson's sound, is that kind of idea of counterpoint, counter melody, and contrapuntal music, which borrows very heavily from the Baroque period, where counterpoint was pretty much invented in the late medieval period, early Baroque period, and now here we are. We find it in the songs of the Beach Boys and Brian Wilson. Fascinating understanding and fascinating use of much older compositional techniques and bringing those into modern popular music and making the most amazing sound. So if you guys have questions or comments or aspects of Wilson's music that you would like to discuss or ask questions about, I am by no means an expert on the music of the Beach Boys and the music of Brian Wilson. I'm not. I most certainly am not. But one thing I do know is I know a creative genius and I know a musical genius when I see one, and Brian Wilson was most certainly that. As a songwriter, as a composer, and as an arranger, I am most definitely a fan of his. Am I a fan of the Beach Boys? Would I have bought their records? No, I wasn't, and I didn't. But that's not to say I was not fascinated by their sound, because I was. I was definitely fascinated by the music that he was making and how unique and original it was. Incredibly original. But no, I'm most certainly not an expert in his music. I don't know the lyrics to many of the songs. I know bits. But one thing he most certainly was, he could write some of the most beautiful melodies ever written. Hans Zimmer described God Only Knows as a perfect song. And I could not agree more. It is the perfect song. Not only is the melody interesting and unique and filled with all kinds of chromaticism and tension and release within the melody, but that's also reflected in the chord changes. Those are not regular popular music chord changes. And then there's the rest of the arrangement of that song, which is completely unique. The drum part is more like a classical percussion chart than it is a drum part, and the bass part is just a thing of beauty. I mean, it's very inventive. It's always moving. It's almost like the bass part in that song is a counterpoint in itself to the main melody. But what a beautiful, beautiful song. And the melody is perfectly married and intertwined with the lyrics. And then the melody and the lyrics are perfectly intertwined with the chord changes and, the other harmony parts and the whole arrangement. It is the perfect song. If ever you could sit down and write a song that could be the perfect song, God Only Knows has got to be it, because it has everything. It has an interesting melody. It has fascinating chord changes that are not regular. There's passing chords. There's kind of classical harmony, and contrapuntal motion in the harmony going on. And I've referred to the drum part and the bass part, but some of the other instrumentation on that song is unique, but it is a fantastic song. If I was to point to maybe just two songs of his, which I would say are not only the songs that I know maybe the best, but that I would say are maybe the two best songs that he ever wrote. God Only Knows is definitely number one, and I would say Good Vibrations is number two. But there's a bunch of songs on the Pet Sounds record as well, which I think could easily fill a top 10 of Brian Wilson's songs. It's so hard to probably pick out the best songs. Anybody that was making a compilation album of Brian Wilson greatest hits, what a tough gig. Seriously tough gig, because you could pretty much just make an extended, 5, 6, 7 record box set that literally just has everything he ever wrote on it. Because how do you pick a best song when there are so many incredibly well-crafted songs amongst all of them? A lot of people refer to Wilson as a genius, but when asked, "Are you a genius?" he replied in probably the way that most definitely tells you the answer is yes. And that is because he didn't say yes. He said, "No, I'm not a genius." And then he went on to list a bunch of people who he regarded as geniuses. He said, "No, I'm not a genius. I just work hard at my craft." And there for me is the key to why I do this show, why I do my Sunday Night Live show, and why I do what I do, why I write arrangements and all of that for other artists. I work hard at my craft. And, that really is something that has stuck with me ever since I heard him say that, where he says, "No, I'm not a genius. I just work hard." And to me, that's the essence of how you get to do the kind of things that he did, and how you get to be the kind of success that he most definitely was. Hard work. If you want to be a good songwriter, you have to practice. Just like a piano player practices their scales and their arpeggios in all 12 major and minor keys, you have to practice your craft as a songwriter. You have to practice writing lyrics. You have to practice writing melody. Melody isn't something that you just have innately. I mean, for some people, melody comes very easily, and for others, less so. I'm one of those people for whom melody is something I have to work quite hard at because it doesn't come naturally to me. Chord changes, arrangements, those come naturally to me. You know, I can orchestrate, I can arrange, I can come up with chord changes very, very easily. I can come up with substitute chord changes very, very easily. I do it at the drop of a hat on a Sunday morning at church when I'm playing piano. I will put in substitute chords, I will put in passing chords, I will do all of those kind of things without really thinking about it because I can just do it. But when it comes to melody, I find that a bit of a challenge. I have to think about it. I have to work much harder at it. But the only way I get better at doing it is by doing it, is by sitting down, writing melodies and throwing them in the bin. And when they're no good, and keeping the ones that are decent. And then, you know, from there, I can recycle and reuse. Maybe one melody that's good, but doesn't really fit this song, may well fit another song and be a better melody for that song. So, you know, there's those kind of elements there as well. But yes, I've kind of been on my podium for a little while there, for like 20 minutes of the show. But I think, you know, Brian Wilson is somebody who had such an impact on everything that this show is about. I thought it was really important that we talk about him and we talk about his music and we talk about what makes his music so, I'm going to put money in the swear jar, so fucking good. Because it is. His music is so darn good. So yeah, very important. So if you want to talk about Brian, if you want to talk about some of the things that we can learn from his music, some of the things that we can learn from his approach to lyric writing, melody, his chord changes, his orchestration, his production ideas, let's talk about those kind of things. If you if you have one of his songs in your head, let's talk about that. We can certainly do that. I would love to spend the next, 25, 30 minutes just talking about that. And, maybe what we can learn from Brian Wilson's approach to music making and his dedication to his craft. Because I think it's his dedication to the craft of music making that is probably the thing that we could all learn the most from. DJ says, maybe remind us of your musical fascinations with Brian Wilson or play elements of his music that are worth recalling. Unfortunately, I can't play anything. And it's not because I'm not capable of playing anything. It's because if I do, I will get an insta copyright strike. I know I will. It's not a question of maybe I will. No, I will instantly get a copyright strike if I play anything of Brian Wilson's music. Unfortunately, and that's no slight to Brian or his estate that is managing his royalties, but it is just what it is. Unfortunately, it is the nature of the beast. I can't perform copyrighted music. I can play chord changes, but that's it. I can't play a melody. I can't do any of that stuff. I can't even post up the lyrics of a song on the screen. Insta copyright hit. So unfortunately, not going to be able to do that. But yeah, I think for me, my big fascination with Brian Wilson was his harmony, his sense of harmony. Boy, his sense of harmony was unique. I mean, it wasn't weird. It was amazing. He was juxtaposing chords and voicing chords that were just not really heard of in that particular part of the popular music world. I mean, the whole, surf sound was Brian Wilson, you know? The irony is he was afraid of water. He couldn't swim. He would never be seen anywhere near water. He was terrified of water. And yet the whole beach, that whole beach surf sound thing, and with the massive hit Surfing USA, I mean, seriously, man. The irony is off the charts that he could write a song that so evokes being young and in your late teens, early 20s, and surfing and being part of that beach culture on the west coast of the United States. He totally captured that sound and captured that mood in the most extraordinary way. I would say, arguably, for as much as Brian Wilson captured that essence of, the beach surfing culture and captured that in his songs that were kind of in that kind of surf sounds style that the Beach Boys was, I think arguably you could say that the music of Becker and Fagan captured the kind of film noir, seedy, dark underworld, kind of evoking that kind of imagery in much the same way as Brian Wilson and his songs captured that surf culture and that surf sound and that surf vibe and what it's like to be part of that. I think Becker and Fagan wrote songs about fading hipsters, failed hipsters, jazz musicians who thought more highly of themselves than they actually were, and they failed because of that. They wrote songs about anti-heroes, but they also covered topics that nobody else would cover. They wrote songs about petty theft. They wrote songs about linchpins in the drug scene in LA, and they wrote all about those kind of characters. And the fun fact about them is that they went to the West Coast to get started as songwriters, and then they started writing songs about California and the West Coast and all of that, and then they came back to New York, where they had come from, and continued writing about the West Coast, and arguably had their most successful songs that they recorded in New York, which were about the West Coast. And they totally captured that kind of dark, seedy underworld that exists in the West Coast. So on the one hand, you've got two different cultures here. You've got the culture of the surfing scene, and then you've got the seedy, dark, sex as a service, drug culture of the other side of the West Coast of the United States. For me, I like that juxtaposition personally. But yes, I think the genius for me is that he captured an entire vibe and made music with it. That for me is just extraordinary that he did that. Let's see what else we have on the subject. Dave says, would you think that Brian perhaps threw some rules out regarding his designs for standard key change / modulations became an art form for him? Yeah, I don't think he necessarily threw out any rules. But what he did do was he used passing tones, leading tones, and not necessarily doing, the standard 2-5-1 to get you into a new key for a modulation that everybody else does, and, pretty much the concept that I teach here. But he actually didn't throw out any of the rules. He actually appropriated much older harmony rules that were developed in the late Baroque and early classical period. The music of Johann Sebastian Bach, Handel, Mozart, and early Beethoven, the harmonic language of that period from, the 1680s through to maybe the 1790s, maybe even into the 1820s. That period there, he appropriated some of that harmonic language and brought that into the pop music world, the pop music realm. So he was approaching modulations and key changes in ways that nobody else was. Key changes and modulations were fairly kind of standardized in the pop world and actually were quite obvious. So it was quite obvious that you were going from one key to another. You either did, if you're in G major, the standard thing was to go up a half step to the key of A flat, or go up to the key of A from there. So the standard was either just a big chord 5 going to the new key. So there's our G major. So, and that's how you'd get to the key of A flat right there. Just a chord 5. So that's quite direct and quite obvious. So the same being if we went to the key of A. So now we're back in our G. All right, so I've just gone up to the key of A from there, just again by just doing the chord 5 directly in there. That's not really exactly what Brian Wilson did. I mean, sometimes he did do that, but a lot of the times it was a little bit more sneaky than that. So he might do a little 2-5-1, but he might put in a little flat 5 substitution in there. You hear that sometimes. But much more likely is you would hear something a little bit more sneaky, like, or, so it's a little less direct. Or he might do something like this, going up from G to A flat. He might do something much more like this. See, I've gone from G to A flat and then back again, but much more subtly by using first inversion chords as a preparation to the new key. And every single one of those that I just did was using a first inversion chord to prepare as a pivot chord to go to the new key. So I started here, G, first inversion F, that's F with A in the bass, B flat, G with B in the bass, C minor, A over C sharp, D minor. Now I'm in the key of D minor. How do I get back to the key of G? And that's how we do it. So we go D minor, E minor, D major over F sharp. So that's first inversion again. And then we do maybe a little suspension here. So those are the kind of ideas that he came up with. And those harmonic ideas come definitely from piano playing. But I mean, they're also from guitar playing, because, first inversion chords on guitar like that are not that difficult to do. But as I said, that kind of harmonic language comes from a much older time. So it's not like he threw out rules. It's more like he brought in older rules. And that's one of the reasons that makes his music so captivating. DJ says, thank you for honoring the death of the great musician in your broadcast. Yeah, I would, it was the right thing to do. DJ says, starting from 1988, Brian Wilson has been leading a successful solo career. In 2004, he completed and released the album Smile. What do you think about this period? Smile is a great record. Now, when you get to 2004, like the last 20 years, then you're getting into Brian Wilson, whose mind is not what it used to be. That's not to say that his musical mind was affected. It wasn't. His musical mind remained largely unaffected by his other mental health problems. And I rather suspect the reason being is because that side of his brain was so well exercised and so healthy that he was able to really, really channel deep into that and focus deep in on that side of his brain to the detriment of the rest of his brain function, it has to be said. But yes, his solo career, the songs he wrote for the Beach Boys were fantastic, but I think the best songs he wrote were the solo records. I don't think there's a whole lot, for me, that I don't think there's a lot of question about it. Billy Morgan says, Brian Wilson's last live performance was July 26, 2022 at the Pine Knob Music Theatre in Clarkson. By the way, that is a fantastic venue. Not just a fantastically named venue, it's a fantastic venue. Period. Really great place. It was the final date of his 2022 US Summer tour, co-headline tour with Chicago. Chicago are a great band, and that was wonderful that he got to play his final tour with such a great band, to be honest. Great examples of progression and harmony. Thank you, DJ. Yeah, I forgot to check who was actually here. Now, I know that Billy Morgan restored himself to his former glory of being first in the door. And we got Ron, who is here because he says, I'm here. We got Kyle, we got Dave, we've got Don Oliver here as well, which is great. We got Keith. We got Goldberg over in Salzburg. And we got DJ, as I have mentioned, and I think that is by and largely it. I think that's everybody here, because we only got 11 people here, so we have a very small crowd tonight, unfortunately. But given the title of this show, I'm surprised that we have such a small crowd. But it is what it is. I can live with it. I'm reading, sorry. Dieter says it's a great example that music goes beyond health, psychology, and everything else, leaving beautiful experiences. Yeah, like I said, when I saw Brian Wilson was probably actually in that on that 2004 tour, I think, that when he came to the UK. Yeah, he was not in a great place health-wise. I would say he was not in a great place mental health-wise. Maybe not necessarily physically health-wise either, but certainly mental health-wise, not in a terrific place. But I tell you what, he performed his ass off. His band was superb, and the songs were as fresh today as they were when they were written back in the 70s and 80s, because that's mostly the material that he played that night was songs mostly from the 70s through the 80s and a little bit from the album that he was touring, which was Smile. But yeah, it was a fantastic performance, and it was just a great shame I never got to see him again after that. But yeah, what a fantastic musician, what a fantastic composer, arranger, producer. I mean, the guy knew his way around a mixing board as well. You know, he was in complete creative control of how everything should sound, down to EQ and compression and all of that. So he knew what he was talking about. And, you know, in his later years, he did integrate digital recording technology that we use today into his music production workflow. And, you know, he made it his thing to kind of to learn it, to figure out how it works and know how it works so that he knows how to get the sound that he wants. So he knows what plugins he wants on a particular channel because he knows what sound he wants to get. So yeah, he was brilliant. Billy says he was at Pine Knob on July 4th show with Ozzy and Mrs. Sharon celebrating their 10th anniversary. Yeah. I've never been, unfortunately, but I know that Steely Dan have played there many, many times over, you know, the last several years since they reformed in 1993 for the tour in 93-94. They played Pine Knob then, and they've pretty much played Pine Knob every year after that. And they always make this fantastic joke about it, because I get why it's a great joke for Donald and Walter, because, you know, what's the name of their band? The name of their band is Steely Dan. What is a Steely Dan? For those of you who don't know, it's a dildo. It's a steam-powered dildo found in the William Burroughs novel The Naked Lunch. And so that is the name of their band. So when they go to Pine Knob, you know, the two kind of go together, really. And so they make it, they make a big, or at least they did. I mean, sadly, Walter died in 2017, but, you know, they just made a joke of that, and Donald still makes a joke of that to this day. So, and speaking of Donald Fagen, he's not been in the best of health recently either, unfortunately. He had to cancel large portions of the 2024 Steely Dan tour, which was a great shame, because they were supposed to make that a world tour, and it ended up just being parts of the United States. And they did that with the Eagles, actually, which is hilarious because both the Eagles and Steely Dan wrote songs where they referred to each other in their songs. So that's really interesting to start with. So when they were supposed to come to the UK and they didn't, the Doobie Brothers with Michael McDonald very quickly put a show together to step in and replace Steely Dan, so that you know, everybody that had bought tickets at least would have a great band to go and see, as well as the Eagles. So unfortunately, I didn't get tickets because they sold out in like 30 minutes, and so I couldn't get a ticket. So unfortunately, so far as it stands, 2019 is the last time that I saw Steely Dan, because that's the last time that they were actually here in the UK. 2019 at the Glasgow Arena, which is now known as the OVO Hydro Arena. Went there just recently. I think I mentioned this just recently. I took my son Sam to go and see Tyler the Creator, which is his favorite rap artist. My son has a really eclectic taste in music. He's into rap, but he's into jazz as well, and he's into some classical music as well. He has this broad range of music that he really likes. So, you know, I can walk past his bedroom and I can hear Tyler the Creator, and then, you know, I can walk past his bedroom again 20 minutes later and I can hear Miles Davis and John Coltrane. So he has a really eclectic taste in music, but he loves Miles Davis and John Coltrane, which of course warms my heart because that's where I grew up. You know, I grew up listening to Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie. I grew up listening to all of that, as well as listening to Steely Dan and, you know, all of that stuff. So, yeah. All right. So, I was about to just use some really shamefully bad grammar. Does anybody have any further comments or questions about Brian Wilson and his music? Like I said, not an expert, but, you know, I can certainly talk about some of the things that I have observed over the years about his music, such as his use of harmony and form and some of his approaches to melody, you know. But we have 8 minutes left of the show. We've only got 10 people here, so we're a little low on numbers. But just to say, by way of reminder, that 1 hour after this show will be the Massachusetts Studio One meetup. So that will be at 2 a.m. UK time. That's going to be 3 a.m. in Salzburg, but it's going to be 9 p.m. Central, I think. I think that's right. Or 8 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central. So yeah, an hour after this show. So if you want to go and talk some more about Studio One, which we don't do on this show, we don't really talk about Studio One. Although, you know, we can do when it comes to using it as a songwriting tool and using things like the chord track and stuff like that, we can talk about that. But if you want to talk more about Studio One and the music that you're making, and if you've got some questions about Studio One, or you are encountering a problem in Studio One, perhaps, especially now that we have Studio One 7.2 out in the wild, if you're having any issues, then you can start talking about them there, and maybe you can all collaborate and help each other and see if maybe you can fix the problem, or you can actually reproduce the problem. And if you can reproduce the problem, then make a support ticket and get that in, and then one of the tech support agents will see if they can reproduce it, and if they can get that into the hands of the developers to get fixed. So that's a good thing to do. And also, if you want to talk about what you'd like to see in the future of Studio One, like new features, new workflow improvements, those kind of things, if you've got those kind of ideas, that's the place to talk about those as well. Okay? So please do that. And we got Mike here. And Mike, yes, you are very late, my friend. We have been talking about the music of Brian Wilson following the news of his death that was announced just actually only a few hours ago. So it is only a matter of hours since the public announcement of the death of Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys fame, but also had a fantastic solo career as well. So we've talked about that. And we've talked about him, and we've talked about his music as well on this show. So that's what we have talked about, Mike, just to bring you up to speed very, very quickly. All right, so with that, folks, we will end it here. You can get an extra 6 minutes to go and pee and go and make a cup of coffee and all of that, and maybe put the dinner on or something so you can have some food before the Studio One meetup. We will leave it there, folks, because I don't see anything new happening in the chat there. All right, folks, I will see you on Sunday for Sunday Night Live, where we can talk more about Studio One and mixing and mastering and all of that stuff. So if you've got Studio One questions, if you don't want to go to the meetup, hold on to those questions and bring them back here, 6 p.m. Central, where we will talk Studio One then. All right, folks, have a good night and a good rest of your week. I'll see you on Sunday. This show has been dedicated to the memory of the late, the great musical genius, Brian Wilson. Good night, everybody.